Man, oh man, is Shining Force an amazing tactical RPG, like one of the best, easily one of the best RPGs ever made for the Sega Genesis. But it has so much going against it. For example, it's an RPG on the Sega Genesis. The Sega Genesis, for whatever reason, it was not known as an RPG system. And because of that, no one actually thought there were good RPGs in the Sega Genesis. There were a couple. I've focused on reviewing a couple actually. This is definitely one of them. But when you think of good 16-bit era RPGs, what do you think of? You think of Chrono Cross, Chrono Trigger, whichever one's the first one. You think of Final Fantasy. You think of that Mario RPG. You think of all the RPGs for the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo. You don't think of the Sega Genesis. When you think of the Sega Genesis, you're thinking great beat 'em ups, great scrolling shooting games, that sort of thing, not RPGs. And this, I think, the second bad thing Shining Force has going for it is its name doesn't sound like an RPG. Shining Force sounds like a sci-fi shooter where you're scrolling and shooting asteroids. It just doesn't like ring RPG in my brain when I think of that. But it is an RPG, a tactical RPG. It's basically controlling a bunch of different characters on screen at once. And it's as deep as your fantastic typical tactical RPGs are supposed to be. For example, you have different types of classes that you control. You have they're all prototypical. There aren't any like crazy weird classes. You don't have like something completely random that makes no sense. You have your warriors, you have your archers, your mages, your healers. You have what are they called? Paladins. I think you have paladins. The horse people are paladins mostly. I don't know if they're called paladins or something else, but they're not like paladins in World of Warcraft though. They're basically like warriors, but they move a lot more than warriors. They can like cover more ground than the warrior, and also they can actually hit you. At least some of them can hit you from far away, depending on what weapons they use, which is awesome. It doesn't mean they're better than warriors, because warriors typically will have more armor and they will hit harder. But the centaur paladin, they're as good or sometimes even better than warriors. The thing is, there are some classes in the game that are just objectively second tier or third tier. Some classes that are just not as good as other classes. Like I would easily take 2 warriors over like 6 archers any day of the week. I don't even care if they're archers, I don't care if they're snipers, any kind of class that just shoots from far away, excluding mages. I would take 2 or 3 warriors versus like half an army of rangers. With a class like, say, the ranger, or what I deem a second or third tier class, it's hard to hit enemies to begin with, because you have to line it up perfectly. You can't just stand next to the enemy. You have to be like a little further away from the enemy. The second thing they have going against themselves is they don't have as much armor, so they can't take as much damage as warriors. But the thing is, they can't cover a lot of ground like the centaur creatures, so they can't even move far. I mean, I would forgive rangers if they were able to like go from one end to the other end of the map easily, but they don't seem to have a long range of movement. They move pretty much like warriors. They're very stocky for characters that are supposed to be light on their feet. The second thing is, obviously they can't take as much damage. They don't hit as hard because they're just shooting with the bow. And also there are some things people don't really think about in this game, but they're very important, and that's what attributes your character improves as they level up, which is incredibly important. Like my warrior levels up and it's like +1 to strength, awesome. +7 to hit points, perfect. I just gained 30% extra hit points. I'm now a killing machine. I'm now literally a tank. No enemies in the next few fights will even be able to dent me in terms of combat. I'm going to throw this warrior right ahead into the combat. He's going to be my tank. And then a ranger or an archer levels up and it's like +1 to strength. Oh great, I don't even need that probably. +1 to hit points. +1 to hit points. My warrior just gained +7 to hit points. And that happens like almost every single level. So while my warrior becomes an unstoppable tank killing machine, my archer's like, ooh, don't touch me, I need to stay away from the combat. One hit, two hits, and I'm dead. And oh, I can't even really hit that hard, and I can't move really that well in the map, but I'm still a good character, right guys? A lot of the characters in this game aren't really helpful like combat characters. They're more damsels in distress that might help you out now and again, but they're much more a liability than an asset. And why would they be a liability? I mean, if they're dead, whatever, they're dead, who cares, right? Well, when characters die in the game, it costs money to resurrect them. You have to go to a priest and you have to pay that priest money. The characters don't just stand up in combat the second the next fight comes. So like you win a battle, but like 4 or 5 of the characters out of like however 8 or 9 characters that you have during combat, like let's say half of them died, you start the next fight, which is by all accounts harder than the previous fight, and all of a sudden half of your team is missing, and you're like, what's happening here? You have to always go to a priest or whatever, a holy man, and resurrect everyone. And it costs sometimes a lot of money. You could, like, any money that you make in the fight, if several of your characters died in that fight, you would have to use all the money you made in that fight to resurrect the characters that died, versus doing something really helpful with that money, like buying things that heal your characters, buying new and better equipment. I mean, Shining Force is an RPG, so it definitely has RPG elements. There's a story, there's walking around town, trying to figure out where you have to go next, what you have to do next. Most of this involves just talking randomly to everyone in town and just trying to figure out what happens next. You also buy things from stores, and then you go to the world map, and from the world map you go to a different town and you repeat, you know, just the typical stuff you would see in an RPG. But the technical aspects in this game are so rich and immersive. There's so much in terms of tactics during the combat. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I already talked about some of it, how you have to keep some characters alive, some characters aren't as good as other characters, but there's so much more aside from the classes. The game is very much like a chess game, where you can't just keep going forward with all your characters. You have to put the characters that can take a lot of damage and can hit hard ahead of everyone else. They have to act like the shield. The archers, the healers, and the mages have to kind of stand behind them, and this of course doesn't always work out, because sometimes enemies aren't all clumped in one part of the map. Sometimes enemies are to the top of the map, but also like to the left or to the right of the map, so they might be waiting to fight you from different sides. And also there's strategy in how far you want to go to the enemy. Like sometimes it's smart not to like walk all the way up to the enemy. Sometimes it's good to like wait a little bit, wait for maybe the enemies to come to you so you can bombard them with your entire team. And the most important strategy is to keep your hero alive, like your main protagonist that you play as. He is more or less a warrior because he can take a lot of damage, and also he can deal a lot of damage. But the problem with him is, unlike all the other characters that you can lose in battle, if you lose him in battle, the game's over. You have to restart that fight from the beginning, and this is sometimes really annoying because the fights in this game last forever. I'm not over exaggerating. Some of the fights in this game, just because of how rich the tactics in the combat is, and the fact that like you have to watch all the enemies move, and then you have to move your entire team and decide how you're gonna play with every single one of your character pieces, the fight can last 20-30 minutes. Which is like so far away from typical RPGs. You take your regular RPG like Chrono Cross or Final Fantasy VI, how long does a typical fight last? Even a boss fight in like Final Fantasy VI, the longest one, what is it, like a couple minutes, 4 or 5 minutes tops? In this game, just a regular fight on the map against an opponent's army or like a brigade of enemies can last half an hour easily. It's great, obviously it's a lot of fun gameplay, but also it can be pretty bad, mostly because at a certain point, even for how rich and fun the gameplay is, it gets repetitive. You're pretty much doing the same thing over and over for 30 minutes straight, and then the music, while the music is good in this game, it's playing on a never-ending loop. So there's definitely annoying aspects in the game that kind of go hand in hand with the good aspects, oftentimes. Shining Force is a tactical RPG that looks good, has incredibly rich combat. I cannot overstate enough how good the combat is in this game. I mean, if you're looking for an old school RPG that's just as rich in terms of combat as something like Dragon Age Inquisition, this is definitely something I would recommend you checking out. Shining Force was a Sega Genesis game, was far ahead of its time. Not in terms of the graphics, but in terms of how rich the gameplay was. It was just second to none. It's better than a lot of classic RPGs on the Super Nintendo, in fact. I can name some Final Fantasy games that are beloved that simply aren't as good as Shining Force. If you like tactical games and or RPGs, and you haven't tried this out, I don't know what you're waiting for, seriously. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more classic game reviews. Goodbye, my friends.